Look, 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 look. How cute is this mug? Can you see it? Get out of here. Being adorable. Y'all think it's a sign that I need a dog. And I don't want just like any kind of dog either. I want a dog that's like a big dog. I want a dog that, like, if we're out in the street, you're not gonna just run up on your girl. You're gonna think twice about it. I need a dog that looks like he's got a family at home. It looks like he works out, but just upper body though, like the boys in high school. You know what? No, I'm off topic. I do need a dog, but that's not what we're here to talk about today. Hey y'all, my name is Shannon Ray. If you are new here, I sincerely welcome you to my channel. I hope that you enjoy it. For all my friends who are coming back, hey boo. This is the third installment of the first series of the year called Life After Divorce. This series is really meant to highlight what it means to go through any type of separation, whether that be the separation of a marriage, a breakup, maybe even a loss of a friendship, but anyone who is separating from a relationship that was serious, that really meant a lot to them, that caused them to go through some of the changes and experiences that I did. I really wanted to do this series for people like me, for people maybe like you who have had an experience that kind of really shaped the next season that they were walking into. So far through the Life After Divorce series, we've talked about first my divorce story. We talked about what it was like for me to realize that I was in the wrong relationship, how that was devastating, likely to both me and my ex-partner. Last week, we talked about the healing process and how sometimes you really have to go through that grief and to get what you can that was good, that was a good lesson, that was a learning moment, teachable moment for yourself so that you can move forward in your life. I kind of hinted a bit at the end of last week's video that this video would have a bit of a plot twist. For me, it was a doozy. I'll put that down as hard not to mess up your makeup while you're also trying to sip tea. Man, where do I even begin? Well, from the beginning. A few months out from when my ex and I had separated, I had moved out. I was living with my parents for a few months at this point. We had both hired our divorce attorneys and we were beginning the process. We get to our very first actual court date following the pre-trial, and I was hit with a serious blow. I don't know how else to describe it, and so I'm just gonna say exactly what it is. In the process of going through a divorce, you have to pull up your marriage license and make sure that it is filed. I don't know what the divorce laws are across the country. I just know that the state that I was married in, you are required to file 2 copies. You take in 2 copies of your marriage license, one comes back, you're good to go. Somehow, through some silly mistake, we were not on file. There was no proof of our marriage in the court system. Essentially what it means is that while I had a marriage license that we both signed, we had witnesses, our parents were there, our friends were at our second ceremony, we actually had 2. So regardless of the fact that we tried to have 2 ceremonies, we thought that we had completed the paperwork at the first ceremony. The validity of our marriage was up for debate in the court of law. Y'all, I can't describe how many emotions I went through while I was hearing this news, while I was trying to digest if this was real. I shared a picture of me in my wedding gown. I shared a picture of us from the ceremony, from both ceremonies. And the judge was still kind of out of pause. He wasn't sure of what to do. There was a law that changed in 2019 that said you had to have that extra paperwork filed. I didn't have the second piece of paper. I did not know what happened to it. I did not know where it went. It was a really confusing and complicated situation. But I don't want to get bogged down too much in the details of that, because let me tell you about the blessing, the providence on the other side of that. So the judge looks at me, we're on a virtual court, he looks at me and he asked me about what my experience was. He asked me to walk him through how we got married, what we did, what the steps were, how we obtained the license. He looked at me in a way that let me know that this really might be a problem, this really might be something to think about. And instead of making a quick decision, he said that we were gonna take a break and we would come back in 2 days. 2 days! 2 days for me to go back and forth on trying to rewalk the steps that I took over a year ago, nearly a year and a half ago at that point. I was really going back and forth, and this question kept reverberating through my body. Was it all for nothing? I was so serious about my vows. To think that the reason I stayed might not even be valid now. I went home, I talked to my mom and dad. I'm pretty sure I cried. I'm pretty sure I was angry, but I was so inside of myself, so into my head, because I had come so far in those few months, understanding that we just weren't a good match. Regardless of what went down, we weren't the right people for each other. However, what does this mean for my rights? What does this mean for my decision making? My parents spent thousands of dollars on that wedding. My family was invested in our future. I did love him. So what does all of that mean? What does that mean for all the work that you do? God really began to deal with me, y'all, during this time. There used to be this little spot I would drive to when I needed to kind of get out of the house, kind of away from everybody, and just spend some one-on-one time with God. So I would drive to this spot off of Clemson Road, and I would kind of just sit there, think, process. I would journal, and I would really, really talk to God. There was something almost demoralizing about it. The thought that the very thing that I was trying to uphold, the very thing that I was trying to treat with the most respect in my life, might not have even been valid. I had thoughts like I would have been gone if I would have known that we weren't even legally married. I had thoughts like we wouldn't have gone through so many trials and tribulations. I wouldn't have lost so much along the way had I known. Please understand, I got to a point where I could really see it for what it was, but in the moment, I was livid. I was also confused, and I really couldn't figure out what God was trying to show me. It was in my head. It was all for nothing. It was all for nothing. The pain was for nothing. The love was for nothing. All of the things, the laughter, the tears, all of the good, all of the bad, all of the hurt was all for nothing if they come back to me and say that this marriage is invalid. And it wasn't like I wanted to go through a divorce process. It wasn't like I wanted to continue to pay for lawyers. I didn't want to have to continue to go to court hearings, but I wanted the respect of the fact that I tried my best as a wife and I deserve to be treated as such. But then God spoke a word. I'm sitting in my car. I am upset. I am trying to get myself together. I had called out of work. I was sitting in that car and I was like, God, what are you doing? God, what are you doing? What does this mean? I feel stupid, and I couldn't think of any other word but stupid. To spend all this money to get lawyers, to try therapists, to try all of the things that you try, to buy the books, to have the weddings, to do all the things that you're supposed to do to make this one thing work. Because you've got to understand, y'all, my biggest dream in life has always to have a family of my own. I have ideas for businesses. I have ideas for creative ventures, but I have always wanted to love God, love myself, and love my family. And so to think that I failed not only at making a marriage work, but also making a marriage valid was a little bit much. So there goes that still small voice coming in after I went off. The more I talked, the less upset I was getting, because I was talking to God and we had been building this relationship where the trust had absolutely been growing. I finally got to the point, as I'm working it out, as I'm talking it through. I mean, I'm literally writing it down. I'm crying, I'm talking, I'm writing it down, I'm crying, I'm talking. And finally I hear that voice say, "Didn't you ask me for vision?" Yeah, but what does that mean? What does that have to do with an invalid marriage? Again, for those of you who might be less familiar with my channel, I've been making videos for a little while. I started in December of 2020, and I have this thing that I do every single year. This year, 2022, I actually have 3 words, but I choose a word to kind of navigate me through the year But in 2020, I chose a word to navigate me through a season. And what's really interesting is that I specifically looked back in my journal. I saw what I wrote when I picked that word, when I prayed over that word. I specifically asked God for a vision for the season. I listed out all these things that I wanted to see. And all of them were really related more so to what's in the future, what I'd like to be able to do for the people around me, what I'd like to establish, what I'd like to accomplish. But God said, didn't you ask me for vision? I showed you you. I was asking for this vision, asking to see these things, and asking for my purpose, my plan, what was to come next, what was it that I needed for the season. I asked him to lift the veil. And instead of him taking the time to show me what I would be doing with my life, what would be coming next with my life, he needed to take the time to show me who I actually am, to rediscover myself. I don't know how or when it happens, but it's like you kind of start going through life, and who God says you are and who the world tells you that you are start to conflict. You get into this world, you get into this rhythm of work, school, your friends, your family, and you pick up certain attributes for them, or you pick up something attributes from the world. You take in media, you take in social media, you take in all of these different narratives, and you begin to change the way you speak to yourself. God had to help me to see who I was before all of that, who I was before all of this stuff, all of the narratives, all of the heartbreak, all of the mistakes, all of the lies, before all of that started to bury me. Because that is what was happening. It was burying me. My voice was getting quieter and quieter and quieter. I was speaking less and less. My light was shining less and less. And I was making myself small. Small in my relationships, small at work, small when I was thinking about what God could even do for me. There was a time where I was so on fire. I was so audacious. I was able to speak about my life, my talents, my God, my relationships with a ferociousness. And it's like I lost it. Somewhere I lost it along the way. And it wasn't just this relationship. It wasn't just this job. It wasn't just these experiences. These traumas had been building up over time. And instead of turning towards God, I was being quiet. It wasn't necessarily that I was turning away, but the dynamic of our relationship was changing. And he had to get me to see. He had to get me to rediscover who I was. It might have been 2010, 2011, when I was, very, very early 20s, and I was forming a Bible study group with some of my closest friends. That was such a small thing when you look at the grand scheme of life, when you look at all the things that people can do. But when I tell you, it felt like such a moment of realization of who I could be in Christ, kind of community that I could help support for Christ, so that people could find out their relationship and find out their pathways, where we could bring questions, where we can have fellowship. And I think about that. It was called the Zechariah Project, also affectionately known as TZP, but it was 139 because it was after a verse in the Bible, Zechariah 13:9. I will never forget sitting in church that day, and I do believe that I was sitting next to my best friend, and we were listening to a sermon. He was reading a certain part of Zechariah, and I remember just flipping the page, and I had been telling her that I had this on my mind. I've been telling her that I really wanted to start a Bible study. She is just as down for Jesus as I am, and so she's always been a great partner for this type of work. And so I'm flipping through, I'm reading ahead, he's preaching, it's hitting me. God is taking over and speaking to me. So I get to Zechariah 13:9. This verse was so important to my life. It was one of the first verses that ever just really stuck with me. It struck me. So it's Zechariah 13:9. This third I will put into the fire. I will refine them like silver and test them like gold. They will call on my name and I will answer them. I will say, they are my people. And they will say, the Lord is our God. That verse always stuck with me. And it was because it was also a parable, right? Because that's the way Jesus talks. The shepherd was struck and the sheep scattered. But for me, what that meant was a role, a calling, a duty that I had into my life that woke that day that I couldn't put into words until now. I couldn't put into words until this experience. And I'm still walking that out, so I'm not gonna share all of that right here on this video. But when I tell you that verse, that parable, the shepherd was struck and the sheep scattered, on the same night where Jesus was betrayed, arrested, and his disciples had to go out into the world for safe covering. Reinventing yourself is about not allowing what happened to define you. Your pain is not who you are. What you become of it is. Your mistakes are not who you are. What you do with them, how you learn from them, is who you are. Are you an overcomer? You made some mistakes, so you're still learning. That makes you a student. That doesn't make you stupid. You might have gone through some situations where you weren't proud of them, but it doesn't mean it has to be who you are. We wear these veils of whatever mistakes that we make. We wear these veils of whatever pain that we're living through. We allow trauma to become our name instead of what God has actually called and said that we are. I was walking around carrying my trauma, and not even just in this relationship, getting into this relationship. And I couldn't see it because I was still laughing and smiling and living, but I had changed my own name. There are so many instances in the Bible where God has changed the name, not only because he wants those people to understand who he says they are, but as a notice to everyone around them who God has called them to be. In the Bible, Abram became Abraham. He was first the exalted father, then he became the father of nations. He needed Abraham to understand who he was in God, so that when he came up against anyone, they would understand who he is as well. We need to wear our names, rediscover ourselves, and stop allowing the cloak of whatever happened to define who we really are. 2 days. 2 days I spent going back and forth with God, trying to figure out what an invalid marriage meant for me. He was using these experiences to show me who I was and who I had become. Rediscovering myself was one thing, but reinventing myself was what he was calling me to do with this information, regardless of what happened. Unknowingly, unexpectedly, God was showing me that I was looking for validation from man. He was showing me that I was looking for the judge to say my marriage was valid because I wanted someone to make it make sense. I was looking for validation within my marriage. It was such an interesting and dynamic experience to sit with God as I realized all the instances of where, instead of listening to what he was saying about me, I was seeking out validation from the situations. I'm a good girl, so I deserve this, but I'm experiencing this. Maybe if I show more love, if I'm nicer, if I'm amenable, you'll see me as I am. I don't need you to. I don't need you to. You don't need them to. Because when you know who you are, it shows up. When you know who you are, your actions speak for themselves. When you know who you are, you don't have to worry about the naysayers. There are always going to be people who are trying to come up and attack what God has put in your life. Sometimes your peace irritates demons. Sometimes your joy irritates other people's pain. People are going to try to tear you down. People are going to try to tear down your very reason for being. But when you reinvent yourself into who God said you are, there is nothing that man can do. The weapons may form, but they will not prosper. I had to start changing that narrative. There was a point where Simon became Peter in the Bible. He came into real relationship with God. God renamed him Peter. Peter literally means rock. God will build his church upon this rock. If you don't know who you are, how can you understand God's will for your life? When I asked for vision, when I asked for purpose, God had to start from the beginning with me. He had to take away all of the things that had been piled on top of me, burying me. Rediscover my values, rediscover the things that I enjoy doing, rediscover the things that I have always been connected to naturally, organically, pulled to. And in order to do that, I had to go through what felt like the loss of everything, what felt like the loss of a dream. We get so caught up in these things that just don't define you. There are things that you are a part of. They are extensions of your personhood, but they are not who you are. I am a woman who believes so deeply in her commitments that she is willing to do all she can before walking away. I am a woman who receives a word from God and then moves. And finding that out is so important, because what I'm walking into, the purpose that I'm finally seeing, I would not have been able to even fathom being worthy enough to accept it if it had not been for this experience. God gave me vision for sure, but God showed me in all my colors, in all the flaws, in all the divinity. God took the time to answer my prayer. By the time I was supposed to hear back from my lawyer about what the decision of the judge was, I had already come to the conclusion. I didn't need the validation. Yes, we got married, but our marriage wasn't legal. The paperwork wasn't filed correctly. There's no record of it. All of this happened and there's no record of it except for me. I have changed. I have grown. I have stepped into something that I won't ever be able to step out of. I've experienced God in a way that I feel him as real as I feel my family, as real as I feel my friends. And it was worth it. It was never for nothing. It was actually for everything. God has called me to take up territory. I'm not sure what he's called you to do, but I do know he's not called you to live in your pain. I do know he has not called you to be defined by guilt, to be defined by shame, to be defined by embarrassment. 2 days go by, my lawyer calls me and gives me the news. The judge says your marriage is invalid. Okay, that's okay. It is well. Because God confirmed me, God validated me before I even got your phone call. There is no way that I would have made it to this pathway had I not gone through this. It had to be this big. God needed me to go back home to rediscover who I was as a child. God needed me to spend time on my own so I could reinvent the way that I was seeing myself to the way that he sees me. There is so much work to be done on reinventing myself, and I'm still in the process. But when I tell you, do not name yourself pain, do not name yourself traumatized, do not name yourself heartbroken, do not name yourself depressed. It is a season that you're in, but it's a season that you can overcome, that you can survive, that you can break through. You are a miracle. This pain is where the miracle is. I call this a divorce series because honestly, I didn't know what other word to use it. You end up finding out that your marriage isn't legal and you're having to navigate your way through those emotions. I really struggled. I really went back and forth on whether or not to even record these videos to tell the story. It wasn't because I was ashamed of what happened. What happened went down, and there's just no mistaking it. I made mistakes, I had triumphs, I had trials. I did some things right, I did some things wrong, and that's just where it is. It was more about what I found, what I discovered with God, because I wanted so badly for you to know it too. And I was moved to do it, I was pulled to do it. I was hearing God constantly tell me, tell them about me. I want you to know what God has poured into me, what he's done for me, because there's no reason why he would do it for me and not do it for you. I pray that you found something in this that was helpful for you, that maybe inspired you, that maybe clicked for you, because God sent me to tell you how much he loves you. You are every bit of everything God has dreamed of. You are his love story to the world. I hope that here that you are able to find kinship, fellowship, relationship, community, and I hope that you join me on other videos. This is the end of the Life After Divorce series, but there are going to be all kinds of videos, all kinds of topics coming forward. I hope you stick with me. I love you, and I hope nothing but the best for you. Have the best week ever. Bye, y'all.